The use of minimalism in photos is a great way to create organized, focused, and very pleasing photos. This can be hard to do in the cluttered world that we inhabit. Today I want to talk about some photos that I've taken that I think involve this quality and how I accomplish them. Now first we have this one that I made in Utah. This is a fellow jumping up to drop a hoop on those haters, you know? And this was at a park, and there were things going on in the background in the park. What I did was I pointed up so that the sky is the background, and all we see in the photo is the sky as a background, which is, you know, very nothing. We have the guy, we have the ball, and we have the hoop. So I use this upward angle to create a very simple, focused, and pleasing photo. Here's another one that I took of a fellow riding a bike in front of a wall in Hollywood Beach, South Florida. He was on the boardwalk. I was standing on the beach, pointing towards the wall, and I had a Sony 70 to 200 millimeter f4 on the front of my camera. So I enjoyed shooting at this beach, and one of the features was this really large wall with these various shades of blue. And the shades are so similar in color that while they're different colors, technically, the color palette is very simple. Overall, the color palette in this scene, in this photo, ends up being very simple and organized. It's a good rule of thumb that the less colors that are in the photo, the more minimalistic the photo is going to feel. And this is one reason why people shoot black and white, of course, or edit black and white. So there's a simplicity here in terms of the color palette. There's a simplicity in terms of the shapes of the scene. Also, there's just not a whole lot of things in the scene. You know, you have the fellow riding by on the bike, which is the most visually complicated thing there. But then you have the wall, you have the short wall in the foreground, you have a shadow of a tree. To me, this is a pretty simple scene. So I was able to use this big wall to act as a very simple environment for whatever subjects I would be taking photos of. In this case, we have a fellow on a bike with a red shirt, contrasts nicely against the wall. A little bit of yellow in there too, nice, welcomed. We have the shadow of the tree there, which would happen in this way because of the time of day that I was there. So I had to come in the morning to be able to get this tree. This was a very fruitful environment. I was able to take various shots here. For example, this one, this one, this one. So I found that a big part of creating minimalistic photos is finding these very simple pockets in the world and figuring out what your subject is going to be. Pretty straightforward. Pretty straightforward in theory, can be difficult in practice. So another way I like to simplify my photos is to point at water. In this case, we have a lot of water, and we have a fellow in said water. This was taken in Miami. I was standing on the beach there, and there was a fellow wading around in the water. There was just this one guy. Now, if there was a ton of people in this scene, the photo would feel less minimalistic. We have one subject and then a bunch of water all around him. There's a lot of scene and environment, which the more you pull out and show more of the scene, the more that minimalistic quality is accentuated. We also have this photo. Once again, one subject. The inclusion here is now a beach. Just a little bit on the bottom of the frame, but same effect. I forget exactly what lens I took this with. Help me editing, James. And I think this was taken with a 70 to 200. Help me editing, James, again. But hey, James, you're pointing at water. You're out there on the outskirts. How am I supposed to take a photo of a city? Well, here's one that was taken in New York City. I covered this one in my Skillshare class. And in this one, I was able to cut this scene and this guy out of a rather busy environment. This was in downtown Manhattan. What I'm doing when I'm walking around in a city, whether I'm trying to go for a particularly minimalistic photo or not, is I'm always looking for cutouts, little cutouts of the world that can make my photo work. Wow. I'm not exactly a professional with water. Sometimes I just get excited, you know? Hydration. What I did was focused in on these pillars and, well, I aimed towards them and it cropped in post to focus in on them more and prominentize them. So, you know, something else that can help in a shot to make it feel more simple is repetition. So we have these two repeating pillars, exactly the same on either side of this fellow. And then we have this fellow acting as a fantastic subject. I assume he does very important work. Now the color palette here is interesting. It's extremely simple. It's almost black and white. It's a lot of gray in the scene. Even our subject is rather gray and black. And so that simplifies things quite a bit. And there's not a pop of red coming in anywhere. Also, the light is doing something helpful for us as well. It's actually darkening the storefront that's in shadow or building front. And so that's more information that is obscured. It focuses us in on the subject and the pillars and the sidewalk. This is a great example of a photo where I didn't have to do any fancy tricks or like angle work to make the photo more simple. Kind of like when I was looking up at the basketball hoop with the fellow, or in the next photo where we're going to be looking down into a skate park bowl with a skater. This is just a straight on shot, but I'm using various techniques to make the photo more simple. But speaking of what I just said, here I used a high angle pointing down into the bowl at the Venice Beach skate park to cut out all the people and stuff that was above on the deck. I had this fellow going by and some pleasing light winding through the scene. So in the other one I was pointing up, now I'm pointing down. And pointing down is something that I use a lot. Sometimes that means I'm up on top of a building pointing down. Sometimes that means that I'm in an area that has verticality to it, like this. So we have a very simple scene. And if this guy was not in the shot, it would be hard to tell what exactly we were even looking at, right? It's just this concrete texture with some light moving through it. So one of the nice effects about a photo with a simple environment is that the subject ends up being kind of the most visually complex thing in the scene, which is great because that's where you want people to look. So that's one really helpful benefit of this. My daughter's sound machine just turned on in her room, and I'm the only one in the house, and I did not turn it on. So that was a very befuddling moment for me until I realized that the sound machine is on a schedule. So everything's okay. Besides, it would be a very strange thing for an intruder to go, I'm gonna turn on the sound machine. One of the nice things about photos with very simple environments is oftentimes the subject ends up becoming the most visually complex thing in the photo, which is good because they're the thing that you want the person to look at, and we tend to be drawn towards visually complex things. The whole scene is visually complex. It's going to divide up the focus emphasis amongst all of it. Here's another photo taken in Salt Lake City of some businessmen walking by. I'm shooting down from a second story through a window, so we have some interesting reflections, and I like how the shape of the guy's arms is mimicking the reflection as they go by. Once again, an example of me looking down. Very simple scene, texture, right? The background, the environment is texture and really one color, basically. So, just up from the top of this photo is a whole bunch of things. Cars, road, train station, bushes, trees, and such. I was able to cut all of that out because I have this high angle. Here's one that I took at the Salt Lake City Library, and this is a great example of the high angle, a simple texture, one subject, one person in the frame. If there's like 40 people in here, it would not, it'd feel more cluttered. And also pulling back, showing more of the scene, which accentuates the minimal quality of the environment and accentuates that feeling in your photo. And I find this photo to be a very pleasing and relaxing photo to look at. It also helps that the person's walking in the same direction, the same diagonal direction as the bricks. I think that's fun. And something I like here is that there's just enough visual context in the environment for the person to not just be in this white abyss of nothingness, right? Like Squidward in that episode where he goes to Nowhere Land or whatever. Like, you want to have some context. But the idea with a photo like this is that you have just enough context that the subject is in the world, the photo is in the world, but no more. Not enough that the photo becomes complicated. With this one, we're back in New York City. We have a very elevated, high downward angle shot of someone crossing a crosswalk. I was able to cut out all the clutter that you would find in a ground level New York City shot. I was able to use the empty street here as the environment and use these repeating lines to make things feel more cohesive and interesting. And the subject could have been wearing various colors and it would have really worked. But it is nice that the subject is also wearing white. Makes them fit into the scene well. Okay, now I want to talk about using selective light to simplify photos. And one of the great ways to do this is by shooting at night. This is one that I took in a town in Costa Rica. It's nighttime. We have the light from a street light illuminating a single cyclist. So I was able to use this selective light dynamic to remove visual information and focus the eye where I want it. And because I'm showing so much of the unlit scene in the photo, I'm zoomed out, it's implied that there is more scene there. We just can't see it. So that makes the photo feel more simple. Here's another one that I took on a pier in South Florida. If I took this photo in the daytime, you would see the water and the sky and, boats and, flying people, very common in South Florida. There's a parasite in the water. It's another video for another day. But in this case, we have one fellow under one light in an abyss of darkness, and we have the railing winding through the scene in a zigzag type of way. And the rail acts as a leading line, which is very nice. But once again, I'm using the night for an extreme removal of environmental context and using this light that's much weaker than the sun to light up just one spot with just one subject. And then finally, using this photo that I took at the Capitol building in Salt Lake City, I want to talk about silhouettes. This one was minimalized by shooting at dusk on the shadowy side of this area, pointing into the sky. So you have silhouettes, and now there's an extreme removal of visual information on the foreground elements in the scene, which is kind of a reverse of what we did in the previous photo. It makes the elements into simple shapes. Well, the lamppost is pretty intricate, but you get what I'm saying. They're just shapes at this point. So even though there's intricacy in the shapes, it's all one color. So it feels very simple, or lack thereof, the color of darkness. So I found that simplifying a photo is about having the eyes to see slivers of simplicity in the world and having the gear, the settings, and the patience to capture the right moment when it happens. And the more you get out there, the more chances you get. Okay, that's it for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Please feel free to like the video if you enjoyed it. Please feel free to subscribe. I would appreciate that greatly. I hope you have a lovely day. Happy shooting. Goodbye.